Hello everyone, hope all of you are doing good. So we are about to finish the second week of TPP, day 10, and a very important theme for your examination, that is democracy. So let's explore what are the kind of themes that we will be doing in democracy, okay? So we have to look at democracy, firstly understanding it as a concept, as a form of government, the values, the virtues of democracy, right? Then comparing the Athenian model and to what extent the Athenian model differs from the modern way democracy has developed, which means what has been the evolution of democracy in the ancient Greece, in the medieval era, and then in the modern times, how democracy has literally become a key form of government with the emergence of liberal democracy, okay? Right? Then we talk about the waves of democracy, how democracy specifically in the 20th century, how it has spread and also how it has faced backlashes, okay? The theories of democracy, right? So we will be talking of the classical and modern theories, what has been the criticism of the modern theories given by Macpherson, all right? Elitist and pluralist model, what Macpherson talks about them. Then the models of democracy being the representative, the participation, the deliberation models, the cosmopolitan idea of democracy, okay? What are the paradoxes of democracy? Larry Diamond has spoken about them. Then what are the contemporary debates in democratic theory, okay? Which ideas have deepened in the concept of democracy? Then we will also be talking of the Chinese model, the consultative democracy, because liberal model is not the ideal type, okay, right? There are other models who say they are democracy. So what are the debates between them? What does China call itself? Socialist democracy, consultative democracy, all right? Joe Biden's summit on democracy, how he has spoken about the challenges democracies are facing in the present times. And yes, electoral system is also a key part, and the electoral systems, what are the debates on electoral systems in the present time, all right? Every year one question at least will be there on democracy in some or the other form. And very important for you to understand democracy because it is very much applicable for you in paper 2 of GS as well. Fine. Now let's see what are the questions of the day. So the first question is, elaborate on the key areas of debates in the contemporary democratic theory. Key areas of debates in contemporary democratic theory. So where do we begin this particular question? Okay. So question is asking areas of debate in contemporary democratic theory. Now, so even though the question is focused on the contemporary democratic theory, should we start with contemporary democratic theory? Should we start with democracy as a form of government or democracy as a way of life or something else? Okay? So we should start this question that democracy as an idea has been as old as in ancient Greece, right? And in 1992, right, 2,500 years of celebration of democracy has been there. So as a concept, it has remained relevant until today. Even though we are moving towards deepening of democracies, right, there is more and more democratic confusion and debates in the quest of deepening democracy. So you start this question with the celebration of democracy as an idea. The celebration of democracy as an idea, right? And it has been realized that democracy is the model which seeks and which does empowerment of masses, okay? And it is a practical form of government, practicable form of government. So first we will be talking about celebration of democracy. In 1992, there has been a key conference in this regard. Because the idea of democracy has been as old as what? Ancient Greece. And then despite democracy being a prevalent form, right, there is a confusion and there is quest for deepening democracy. Now let's see what are the key areas of debate in contemporary democratic theory. The first debate is on representation versus participation. And now we are seeking more and more deliberation as well. Deliberative aspect of democracy. So what will be the key thinkers in this regard? So representative democracy, okay? So J.S. Mill talks about representation form of government, and he says that it will not succeed in the third world, okay? Because there are certain virtues of democracy, there are certain prerequisites that have to be met for democracy to be realized. So it was understood that representative democracy is the most practical aspect, because we are moving from ancient city-states to what? To complex societies. Okay, we are no more politically organized as a small unit as we have seen in ancient Greece, but there has been more and more what? Complex societies that have come into shape, and in this context, the most practical idea is representative democracy. But representative democracy in itself has not been enough. Okay, so democracy should not be reduced to a one-time vote exercise in 5 years. All right. So we have spoken of what concept? We spoke of participation. And participation is very, very important in the idea of democracy. Okay. So here there have been mechanisms that have been brought, like social audit, like RTI, like you can also give example of MyGov portal, and how people have also started to participate in democracy and the virtues. Okay, so Rousseau is talking of participatory democracy. Then we talk about deliberation. So yes, the quest for deepening continued in contemporary democratic theory, and scholars like Amartya Sen, okay, like Habermas, Hannah Arendt, all of them have spoken. Joshua Cohen has also pointed towards the advantages of deliberation and deliberative aspect of democracy, which is a qualitative aspect of democracy. So first debate is this. So you don't start with the elitist and the pluralist model, okay? No, you will be starting first with this representation, participation, deliberation. We are talking of terms in this context and not with the elitist or pluralist model, all right? Now, the second area of debate that comes in democracy is democracy and difference. So what is the idea of democracy and difference? So here we say that liberal democracy, okay, right, has been a virtually dominant form of democratic model, and it sought for what kind of citizenship? Okay, so it sought for universal citizenship, But however, democracy has inequalities, right? And this liberal idea has difference blindness towards the various sections of society. It is in this context that differences need to be recognized, inequalities need to be addressed for making democracy more effective. So scholars like Iris Marion Young, then you have who talks of what? Differentiated citizenship, okay? Then you have Will Kimlicka, multiculturalist, who talks about rights for minorities, and democracy should not be reduced for what? You know, will of the majority, right? Only even minorities have to be incorporated. So multicultural also talk about recognition of differences and not difference blindness that has come with the idea in liberal democracy, all right? The third context is democracy and development. So democracy and development. So we very much know that when India became a democracy, okay, after the 1950s, there have been lot of contest and speculation that democracy in a country like India will not survive because we don't hold the prerequisites. So we had universal adult franchise which came in the very first elections. Okay. Now the idea of democracy and development is what? So there is a key, this is a key debate between Lee Kuan Yew and Amartya Sen. So what are they debating? So Lee Kuan Yew points towards the socialist countries and countries like China, and why they have advanced and why they have developed at a more rapid rate of development, okay, is because they compromise certain virtues of democracy and they brought in authoritarian kind of models. Okay. On the other hand, India adopted democracy after the independence, and this was the reason, says Lee. So he gives this Lee thesis and he says the path that India has tread has not enabled India to achieve the level of development it could on its own to its best maximum potential. So Amartya Sen questions this, that there is no logical, factual or ground on basis of which Lee Kuan Yew is making such kind of a thesis. Even though democracy has certain problems, certain limitations, but democracy is the only solution, okay, if we really want to achieve the goals that we want to. So democracy is part of the problem and democracy is the only solution to this particular problem. So development also has to be understood, he says, in a broader term. Development is not physical development. Development is also freedom oriented. Development is also human development. And by compromising liberties of the people, the development, if we are seeking, is physical infrastructure, then it is not the sort of development. Okay, development should be one that should be for masses. All right, and it is in this regard that Sen questions authoritarian models like those in socialist countries and says that we need to change our own idea of development. Okay. So yes, these are the key areas of debate in contemporary democratic theory. Is it clear? So we'll just quickly recap how we are celebrating democracy, and Churchill has rightly said that it is the best form of worst form except that the rest have been tried. Then we talk of representation, participation and highlight the deliberative aspect. Then we talk about democracy and difference, and multiculturalist, feminist, Iris Marion Young talks of differentiated citizenship. Will Kimlicka is talking for rights for national minorities. Then there is democracy and development that has come with Lee thesis and Amartya Sen, and thus we can either quote Joe Biden that presently we have to protect democracy, we have to defend it. Every generation will have to do it, okay, not only historically. Even Obama says we have to take democracy very seriously. So add this Joe Biden context, even if that there are challenges like corruption, authoritarianism that have come to democracies, but we still have to protect it and preserve it. All right. So end with that context. Now, let's come to question number 2. Discuss the relevance of paradoxes of democracy in the present context with relevant examples. So what is the challenge in this question? Everybody could have written this question, but the challenge has been current examples. Okay, right? So you will not be able to generate this kind of examples until you really think. So let's see. Question is the paradoxes of democracy. Paradoxes of democracy. Is it understood? So the first thing that we have to talk about is that democracy is an ideal. Right? It is an ideal and it also has certain sets of limitations. Okay? Even though practical and accepted, most accepted form of government. Okay? So it is a practical form of government, but it still remains an ideal. It is not perfect in that sense. Okay? So Larry Diamond is talking about the paradoxes. Larry Diamond is talking about the paradoxes. So let's move towards the paradoxes that he is talking of. All right? So the first problem he's saying is between consent and effectiveness. Consent and effectiveness. So what is this consent and effectiveness? All right? So Larry Diamond say the paradox is that every country, okay, it will need some sort of key reforms for its long-term economic growth, social growth, right? And in order to bring this reform, there will be some sort of strong measures and steps that will have to be taken. But however, there is a problem with that to what extent this consent we will be depending on. Why? Because that many times, the voters, okay, might not accept these kind of reforms, and then the government of the day, okay, so the government of the day might feel some kind of a challenge in the upcoming elections. So what is the solution that he is giving? Okay, so he is giving solution that there has to be a charismatic leadership which is able to convince people, right, and gain that legitimacy for these kind of reforms. All right? So on one hand, we are talking of taking consent, but every time it cannot be. Effectiveness of policies has to have some bold measures, bold steps. But sometimes behind this consent, there can be problem, and the consent is expressed obviously in the election. So the government might face some backlash. For example, if the government today talks of removal of reservation, so the uproar that can happen, okay, does not mean I am advocating that reservation has to be removed. Idea is that sometimes when we want to take any kind of bold measure, it is problematic, like the farm laws, okay. So some aspect of it may be very much needed in Indian agriculture, but bringing them wholesome could have challenges, and to take such a bold step without a larger public consent will be problematic to India, okay. So obviously they were repealed. And on the other hand, if we talk of effectiveness and consent, so Article 370, it was a measure which was much needed for a very long period of time, all right? And yes, it was eventually brought, okay? So now, it does not mean the government of the day will be penalized. To what extent reforms they are taking after implementation of these bold measures? Similarly, in the LPG, so when LPG was supposed to be brought, there have been a lot of skepticism, right, in the entire, political consensus, right? There has been also a lot of speculation. So it was brought, and then we see that today there are advantages, obviously there are disadvantages also. So consent and effectiveness problem has to be handled by a very strong, bold, charismatic leadership, all right? The second problem is between representativeness and governability. Representativeness and governability. So we have the first past the post system, okay, and it has been criticized on a lot of grounds, okay, right, that it creates majoritarian type of government, it is not representing multiple sections of society, right, votes and seats conversion is very problematic. So there is a proposal, okay, that we should move towards proportional representation system. So he says that yes, bringing in proportional representation system might bring a lot of diversity. But what is problematic with this proportional representation system? He says that there is formation of coalition governments. And this formation of coalition governments is problematic because it impacts the nature of governance. Why? Because all decisions might get delayed. Okay. Now imagine same parties are also facing problem where there is lot of defections that are happening, splits that are happening, as we see in the Maharashtra, right? So if we have coalition government, which India has already witnessed, we see how the regional governments can act as a block also, right? In, for example, solving the Teesta issue with Bangladesh has been standing because regional government. So if the regional governments are represented at the national level, okay, and they create a lobby in that way, so it is very difficult to make that government very effective and take strong measures. Now that the government, present government enjoys a lot of majority, okay, in the Lok Sabha, right, that it is able to take such bold measures. So it knows that it enjoys that kind of legitimacy. So it is able to take bold measures, it is able to do effective governance. But coalition governments can be very problematic in the way how governments function, governance work. It can delay things. All right? And the third is the problem between conflict and consensus. Conflict and consensus. So yes, with respect to the problem of representation and governability, the solution that Larry Diamond is giving, that we should make the voters more educated, we should spread more voter awareness campaigns, okay, institutional bodies should take up this so that people really know what they are voting for, all right. Now let's come to the problem of conflict and consensus. So what is this problem actually? So democracy is based on the idea of consensus, okay. So Locke and others have established social contract on what basis? On the basis of consent, okay. Consent is the factor on the basis of which the contract has been signed. Liberal theorists have done that. So when we say that consensus on things has to be there, like imagine India has to adopt the UCC, or we are doing same-sex recognition, whether we should do it or no, the consensus is there in the people, okay, some sections of the people. Whether that consensus is there in what, it is there in the judiciary also, whether it is there in the political circles also. The issue of reservation in Manipur, okay, to what extent there is consensus that it should be given to the Meetis also, fine. So when we talk of that, consensus is the basis of policy making. Now too much dependence on this consensus is also problematic, because this consensus can anytime turn into conflict. Why? Because consensus raises aspirations of people. They'll make claims, right? And these claims that they will make can turn violent, it can lead to conflict. If people are citing public opinion, okay, right, making slogans, doing peaceful protests, it's a different thing. But the turn they take, they become violent movements. Not all protests are like the agriculture protest that took in Maharashtra. It was like a model protest, right, very peaceful how it was done. But how the Manipur issue, okay, even the farm laws, right, the protest, it became very conflictual. So even this is a problem. So the leadership and people, they have to achieve this sort of a balance to what extent they can oppose. And even the government, the leadership has to take control, authority, to what extent consensus will be allowed, okay. So in this regard also we need a strong leadership, says whom? Larry Diamond. So he is talking of this paradox of democracy, means what are the problems inherent in the model of democracy. However, he says that if we take reforms and done, then yes, it is very much applicable. He is actually talking of these challenges more in the context of developing countries that he has studied and what challenges they will face. All right? Fine. So this is about day 10. I will just quickly go through this paradoxes of democracy. So how it is an ideal form of government, though most accepted, okay? It might end up in mob rule or, you know, oligarchy, polyarchy, anything. So Larry Diamond in his work, 3 Paradoxes of Democracy, talks about these things. First problem between consent and effectiveness, where he says that we need strong charismatic leadership. Second problem is between representativeness and governability, okay? And the third problem is between conflict and consensus, all right? Then, however, he says that rather than, you know, worrying about these problems, we need to find more solution democracy needs to be deepened and expanded. All right? So this is about democracy. Take the updates from the notes on the Joe Biden summit as well as the Chinese socialist model. And yes, you should also expand on the questions, the scholars that you have studied for the other models. All right? Thank you so much. All the best. We'll meet next week again with day 11. All right? I hope you will cover your backlog over the weekend as well. And yes, those students who feel like can make a voluntary help to us so that we can keep producing such good content for you. All right? And it is just 512 rupees monthly. You can subscribe to that, and it will help our initiative in a more better way. Thank you so much.